And I find that she has some brass neck in lecturing us when we saw this series of failures under her government. The reason that we are here today, the reason that we as a government inherited record levels of pollution in our waterways was a failure by the government of the Right Honourable Lady to see what was happening before their eyes. A failure of regulation, a failure of the regulators, and a failure of the previous government.
Whilst her government is in chaos, paralysed by the Prime Minister's weakness and the Mayor of Manchester's leadership ambitions, Thames Water continues to fail. If no deal is reached, Thames Water could collapse, again at enormous cost to taxpayers. The Secretary of State has said she does not want a scenario where customers pick up the bill for the company's failures. But when the Conservatives tried to amend the Water Special Measures Act to prevent consumers being on the hook in the event of a company going into special administration and tried to impose a lending ratio limit on water companies to prevent this situation happening again, Labour voted it down. Why? I also remember when, under the former Secretary of State, an investor pulled out of a previous rescue deal, partly due to political risk. In other words, he had talked himself out of a deal. How is the current Secretary of State avoiding the failures of the now Secretary of State for Housing? Those who are urging nationalisation, a word thrown around carelessly, in fact, I think I've heard it just now, by Labour backbenchers and by Reform. None of them explained that nationalisation would be extremely costly to the taxpayer, potentially up to £20 billion, which is equivalent, to those who are wondering what that means, it's roughly equivalent to the defence funding shortfall about which we have heard so much in recent days. How will the government ensure bill payers are not left bearing the cost of past mismanagement? And has the government offered or begun any process to recommend an alternative deal? Public trust in the water industry is already at rock bottom. Ministers have still not explained how investment in the sector will actually be paid for. Indeed, the Secretary of State's predecessor had to admit that the so-called private water industry investment, which I see the Secretary of State's repeated today, is in reality paid for by higher bills. Families already struggling with the cost of living should not become the safety net for a company that rewarded its executives whilst letting its infrastructure crumble.
Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady rightly says that untreated sewage has been poured into our waterways. Yes, for the long years that her party was in government. When they cut the enforcement budget of the Environment Agency, moved to an approach where water companies mark their own homework, the so-called self-monitoring approach, and I find that she has some brass neck in lecturing us when we saw this series of failures under her government. The reason that we are here today, the reason that we as a government inherited record levels of pollution in our waterways was a failure by the government of the Right Honourable Lady to see what was happening before their eyes. A failure of regulation, a failure of the regulators, and a failure of the previous government. I am proud of what we've achieved in the 2 short years that we've been in power, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud of the Water Special Measures Act. When did the Conservatives ever cap polluting water bosses' bonuses? Never. She lectures me about amendments to our Act. Our Act did more in less than a year than they did in 14 years. She asks about nationalisation. I would just gently say that the special administration regime isn't the same as nationalisation, and she's yes, okay. No, I'm just clarifying for the House. I don't wish to have an exchange with her across the ballot box. If I can, dispatch box. That might be another point. Dispatch box, if I can possibly help it. There is a difference between the two. Nationalisation would be taking, obviously, ownership by the government of the company, but a special administration regime would be the government financing a special administrator appointed by the courts to run the company. She talks talks about public trust in our water sector being at record lows.
So please, just let me hear it as well. We don't need a Roman commentary all the way through it. I make sure that we're listening to you.
And I have to say, I'm not surprised that there aren't many backbenchers on her benches, given the terrible record of the Conservatives when they were in power on the water industry. We are taking forward in our Clean Water Bill, which will be introduced later in the session, a once-in-a-generation reform of the water sector that is desperately needed to introduce a powerful single regulator that holds water companies to account.